So this is lesson 2. We're going to build a soundboard. And since Martin Luther King Day is coming up in January, this is the appropriate app for us to use. You don't have to use these sound clips or use these pictures. You can modify this and change it to be your own sound clips, your own pictures. So right now, the way this app will work is when you click on this picture, it gives you a speech, and if you click on this picture, it gives you a different speech. Pretty straightforward. You could add in your own kind of sound effect board and do a whole bunch of sound effects if you want, rather than just 2. This is just a static picture that's sitting there in the background. It really doesn't do anything. So you could take up the space and fill up several different blocks if you want. So there's some structural importance that we have to talk about here. But first you go to App Inventor. You guys all know how to do that. There is a link at the top of the unit to get there. There is a starter app that you will find, but I have put it for you right here in starting code. You can download that, which will include all of the sound clips that you need and images that you need already inside of App Inventor. So you can just get started rather than having to find that. If you do something different, of course, you have to find your own images and your own sound clips. Be aware that sound clips are copyrighted. So if you're going to get a sound clip, you probably want to get something from the sound clip, sound effects, or from the music archive, one of those two, and use those as sound clips rather than just randomly finding things on the internet. We cannot just use anything we find on the internet. You can't use popular songs. You can't use quotes. You could record people with their permission. You could record yourself and make your own sound clips, but you can't just take clips that have been recorded already on the internet without permission. And we've talked about permissions before. So you're going to import the project. You're going to go to Project. You're going to click on Import and import the file that you just downloaded. It's an AIA extension, so it's .aia, which is different than the .apk. The .apk is a file that compiles on the phone or whatever device and is not something that you can open up in App Inventor. You can't see all of the components in App Inventor if it's already been compiled to an APK file. The AIA file is the App Inventor file. It's their extension. It won't work on anything else other than App Inventor. So when you download the startup code, if you double-click it, your computer's going to say, what app should I open this with? It's not going to do anything. The only way to make that file work is to upload it into App Inventor, and that's very important. So once you import that project, you will get a couple things. You'll get all the sound clips. You'll already have a button on the screen, so some things will be done for you already. The first thing we want to do is change the image property of the button to match the MLK picture. So it's the big picture of MLK. It's called MLK.jpg. You're going to change that. And when you do that, you can see that the picture becomes Martin Luther King, much like when we did the magic hat. We changed the hat to that image, changed that image picture. The text property should be blank. Some of you I saw in your other app left the text property, and it kind of says, text for this button on top of your image. So we want to blank that out so there's no text sitting on top of our button. So those are the two things you have to change for this button to start working. This whole thing is called the UI. That's a computer science term, design term. It stands for user interface. Sometimes you might also hear somebody say the UX. That's the user experience. That's another way of talking it. Why don't they call it UE? Is because UX sounds cooler. So they call it the UX, or the user experience, or the UI, which is a user interface. Next thing we're going to do is associate that sound that is in the media files to a component. The App Inventor system cannot just play a sound file. It needs a player to play the sound file. You can have more than one player. If you want to play more than one sound at once, you have to have more than one player. But for our purposes, for our soundboard, we're only going to have one player. If you decide that you want your soundboard to be able to play more than one sound at once, you need multiple players. You would need a player for every single sound if you're going to allow it to play every single sound simultaneously. Sometimes you want to do that. If you want it so it can only play one sound at a time, you only need one player. So we're going to use one player. So we're going to click on Media, and we're going to find the sound player, which is right here. It looks like a little speaker. It says sound. Right above the speaker. Player. It looks like a little play sign. Drag that into this area, and it will show up down here. So it's a little play symbol. We're going to drag it into this area, let it go, and it shows up down here. It does not go into the user interface. The user doesn't see this. It's a component that the computer needs to make the sound play. Then we have to do some code. And the code is associated with the components. Just like we saw in Scratch, you have clicking on a sprite gives you a listing of things that you can do for that sprite. Clicking on the background gives you a listing of things you can do for that background. Each sprite was separate from every other sprite. So if you clicked on the wrong sprite, the code that you had just been working on for the previous sprite looked like it was gone. That's not really what happened. What happened was the code was encapsulated for an individual sprite. In Scratch, you had different script windows for each component or each sprite. In App Inventor, everything goes into the same script window. So when you add code for the button or you add code for the sound, it will all go into the same script window. It won't switch, which I think is a little bit easier to deal with than what happens in Scratch. But Scratch is a little bit easier of a program. It's designed to prevent you from making mistakes like accidentally adding code to the wrong sprite. So the first thing we're going to do is when we click button 1, we're going to call player 1 and we're going to tell it to start. So when we click on a button, it's going to play a sound. Once you do that, you can try building your code from there and running it. And when you click on this image here, it will play a sound, which is the Martin Luther King speech. We're not done with the app yet. We want it to do more than just one sound. So we're going to modify this a little bit. Because really, we want something like this. We don't want to just have one button. We have multiple buttons. So you can make a copy of this project. And this is how you make copies of all your projects. It's not a remix like we do in Scratch. What you have to do is go to Project, Save As, and it'll make a copy of this project. Something like, I Have a Dream would be a good name for this project, or your soundboard will be a good name for this project. Just save it as something else, so that way you actually now have two copies. Your original project, which will be just one button, play a sound, and a new one, which will still be one button, play a sound, but now we can modify that. So that's a good practice. As you add in new things, making copies of your project so you have an original working version that you can always go back to. Just in case you mess up your project, you always have a version that you can go back to that you know is safe. It's called version control. It's something that we do a lot in programming, where we have multiple versions of the same program doing different things. There's several systems that are designed to do version control automatically. One of them is GitHub. We don't have that kind of system built in with App Inventor, so we really have to do our own version control, and that's really what we're doing here. We're creating another copy of our program, so we have a version control. This is version 1. Now we're moving on to version 2, which will have more abilities. So you're going to switch to the smaller MLK version, the 152 by 129. So we're just going to change our image to a different image. We're not changing any of the code. And then we're going to do two things. First, you have to modify a layout. You see, when you put in the next button, when you add the next button, it will show up below this button, not next to it. So in App Inventor, what you have to do is click on the layout box and drag what's called a horizontal arrangement into your layout. Then you need to put both buttons, the one from before and a new one with the Malcolm X picture, into the horizontal layout. So you go to Layout first, choose Horizontal Layout, drag it to your screen, then drag the first button that we created into the horizontal layout, then create a new button, change the picture to Malcolm X, and put that into the horizontal layout. The other thing we want to do is make sure we start naming our buttons. So when you have the button clicked, you could go in and change this button name to Malcolm X button, and you can go back and change the Martin Luther King button to something that makes more sense, like the MLK button. So that way you know in code which button is which. Once you change the name, a nice feature is in the code, it updates the name that was previously there to the new name. You don't have to worry about changing that. A lot of other types of systems, you would have to change both. You couldn't just change one. It wouldn't change it for you, but this will change it for you. Then we want another component here. We're going to add an image component, which looks like a landscape, a little sun. We're going to drag that component, and we're going to set that property to be the larger picture of the two gentlemen together, which is the, I can't read the file name, but you guys will find it. It's Malcolm X and MLK something. So you're going to drag that image into above the horizontal arrangement, and the horizontal arrangement will just shift down. And then you're going to set the image property to be the picture of the two gentlemen together. We can add another sound component now for the new sound. So that way we can play both sounds at the same time. We can kind of have them overlap each other if we want. So we drag in another player component. We're going to choose the Malcolm X speech for that one, and we'll hit play. You can also change the background, so it's a black background. It fits a little bit better with these pictures. Depending upon what you do, you could have an image for a background if you're doing your own version of this. So you might want to have multiple horizontal arrangements that have different buttons. You could probably fit 3 on here and probably get 6 different sounds. If you use smaller pictures, you could fit more. The smaller the pictures, the more you could fit. Now for the code, we're going to do the same code. Notice though it changed the name by changing our button from just button 1 to MLK button. It automatically changed the name for us in code. Also for the player, if we change the player name from just player 1 to MLK player, it changes it in code for us. So now we know that we have a better name for our player and a better name for our button, which when we go to create our other button, we can keep them separate. Rather than just button 1 and button 2, it's now a name that makes sense. We're also going to create a conditional. We did conditionals inside of Scratch. This conditional is a little different. It's called an if-then-else. To make it an if-then-else, you click on your conditional tabs, you find the if block, and you drag it in. And then it has this little blue square in the upper left-hand corner. You have to click that, and then you get this little pop-up, and we're going to drag the word else into this space right here, and it'll change this structure to be an if-then-else. An if-then-else will test a condition. If it's true, it will do whatever statement's attached here. If it's false, it will do whatever statement's attached here. We're going to use this to control the playing, so that way we don't overlap one sound or another. So here's the behavior we want to happen. We want the first click to start the speech, the next one to pause it, the next one to start it. So as we click on it, we essentially want to be able to pause the speech in the middle. Then when we click it again, it should either start playing again or restart. That's going to be up to you to decide. So it either acts truly like a pause button or it's a total restart. So we're going to use this conditional to affect whether or not we pause it or we restart it or just start playing it again, depending, again, your choice. And this conditional is going to check to see if the speech is already playing. If it's already playing, then we want to stop it from playing. If it's not already playing, then we want to either restart it or start it playing. So here's how this works. If the MLK player is playing, and that conditional test will be underneath the MLK player. You click on that, and one of the options, if you scroll down the whole list there, will be to check to see if the MLK player is playing. We're going to click on the MLK player, and our options are to call MLK pause. So if it's playing, we want to pause it. Otherwise, we want to call start, MLK start. So we now have this conditional inside of our MLK button. We've modified our MLK button so it does more than just play. Now it will test to see if it's currently playing. If it's playing, it will pause it. We're going to do exactly the same thing, but the easy way to do that is you can right-click on your code and hit duplicate, and it will make a second copy of it. And all we're going to do is change this from the MLK player to the Malcolm X player, and we're going to change this from the MLK button to the Malcolm X button, and we'll have exactly the same functionality for both images. So we now have two different buttons with the same functionality. Probably should refactor that code at some point in the future, but I haven't taught you yet how to write functions in App Inventor. So we're going to leave it as kind of duplicating work, and that's okay. So this app consists of two event handlers. When an event occurs that needs to be handled, that's called an event handler. The first one is when the MLK button is clicked. That's an event. We're handling it. The second one is when the Malcolm X button is clicked. That's an event. We're handling it. Feel free to customize this, like I said. You can even go ahead and see if you can make it do something when you shake the phone. Instead of just pressing a button, you could add in the I am shaking, which you can test on the emulator, the Knox emulator, just by clicking the shake button. Don't actually try to shake your computer. That can result in disastrous results, especially if your computer is fairly heavy. That can cause problems. Again, make sure if you're going to modify it that you get sound from something that is open source, and those links are in Blackboard. So go ahead and start creating the project. Now, you have this video to work from, but you also have in here another tutorial video. There's 3 parts to this, and you can follow the tutorial video all the way through. It will have you create different versions, just like I talked about creating. If you would like to jump to the final version and just create the final version, that's okay. You could watch all 3 videos, or you can watch through this video and create the entire final version in one shot. You don't have to create the intermediate versions. That's entirely up to you. I recommend, since we're first getting started, that you go ahead and you do create the intermediate versions. 1, so you get used to the idea of version control. So you are creating different versions. 2, so you can kind of see the process of stepping through how to do this. When you're done, the submission of this is very different than the way we submit it for Scratch. We submit it for Scratch by just giving me a link. That's not going to work here. What you have to do is inside App Inventor, you would click on Build, and it right here says APK. That will build your test file for Knox. You want to make sure that you test your program in your emulator. Or you would test it by clicking Connect and connect it to the emulator. Neither of these will get you the file that you need to submit. To get the file that you need to submit for this assignment, you have to click on Projects, and you have to click on, where is it? Export selected project.aia to my computer. That is the file that you're going to submit. That allows me to upload your file to my version of App Inventor and see all of your code and see everything that you've done. Otherwise, the best I can do is to run your app and hope it works. I want to be able to see the code, not just run your app. So I want two things. I want the AIA file and the APK file. And the reason I say I want two things is because in the past, when I said I only want the AIA file, notoriously someone accidentally gives me the APK file anyway. And they don't give me the AIA file. So if I tell you I want both, you won't forget it. So I want the AIA file by clicking on Project, Export Selected Project to my computer. And I want the build file, save APK to my computer. You should get two files. Both get submitted in Blackboard for you to get credit for the assignment. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. You're more than welcome to do exactly the same MLK project and submit that. But I'd be more interested to see what you come up with. Different sounds, different images. Maybe you decide to come up with more than just two and come up with a whole soundboard. And if you have an Android phone, that's kind of a fun app to have on your phone, to have your own little personal soundboard that you can walk around with and make different sound effects and play different sound effects at, inopportune times. So have fun, and we'll see you next lesson.